Great to have you with us. I'm Joe Donlin.
And I'm Marie Saavedra. We begin with those ICE protests in Chicago, both in California and here at home.
We start with our Sabrina Franza. Sabrina, with more protests ahead for Chicago, you've just learned more ICE agents are coming to our city. And this is all going on as Chicago police prepare for a massive demonstration Saturday.
Joe Marie, here in Chicago, there's slated to be a planned protest as part of the No Kings Rally Day. Chicago will be one of around 1,800 locations across the country participating in that day. That protest is expected to start around noon in Daley Plaza. But before that happens, the city tells us that ICE tactical teams are on their way to Chicago, set to land tomorrow, bringing with them, they say, mini tanks.
Yesterday, the notice was given to agents that they have 48 hours to deploy.
ICE agents in mini tanks, the city revealed in a briefing today, are headed to 5 Democratic-led cities, including Chicago. Tactics similar to what sparked some of the protests in Los Angeles.
With arms, with also chemical agents. We have seen them in full riot gear. We have seen them fully concealed.
This is what democracy looks like. Yesterday, Chicago joined cities like LA and New York, taking over their streets to protest immigration and customs enforcement.
We have a tyrant in the White House who has a complete disregard for our Constitution.
Of the massive group, Chicago police arrested 17 people during yesterday's demonstration in the Loop. Their ages ranged between 20 and 37 years old. 4 of those charged faced felonies, including aggravated battery to a police officer or criminal damage to property. Police are still looking for the person driving this red car who drove through the crowd. Mayor Johnson's team says they're already meeting to figure out a way to stop that from happening again in a situation where we're told there is no established protest route.
There were a number of organizers that, though it was structured, there has to be better coordination.
Now, the city says those tactical teams are aiming to deport people here in Chicago and will possibly show up to their places of work. Also happening tomorrow, Governor J.B. Pritzker is slated to testify in D.C. in front of a House Oversight Committee, so that means he will not be in town when those tactical teams show up. We're live in the Loop. Sabrina Franza, CBS News, Chicago.
Sabrina, thank you. From festivals to protests, thousands of people are expected downtown this weekend.
Our Suzanne Lemignot reports safety is top of mind for city leaders.
It involves uniformed officers, those in plain clothes, and trained violence interrupters. Social media is also going to play a big role in getting the word out when it comes to staying safe at the upcoming protest. Just like April 5th, thousands of people are expected to converge once again on Daley Plaza this Saturday at noon. They'll be voicing their opposition to the Trump administration's policies, ICE raids, and deportations.
We want people to exercise their First Amendment rights. We also want people to be safe.
Gary Ann Gatewood is the deputy mayor for community safety for the city of Chicago. The so-called No Kings protest is one of many events in the city this weekend. Days off for Chicago police have been canceled.
All of our resources will be out from the Chicago Police Department. We actually had a meeting this morning with all of our community violence interrupters so they can understand how we'll be deploying them and working with them tomorrow as well.
All city agencies are also putting a series of tips on their social media platforms with protesting guidelines and overall safety information. The move comes after the arrest Thursday of a man spotted by police during a protest downtown. Sources say the man was wearing a black polo with the word police on the back and had a black book bag with a police patch on it. The problem is, he wasn't an officer. He was openly carrying a loaded semi-automatic pistol. The man has a FOID card but told police he did not have a concealed carry license. He was found with badges and documents saying he was part of a special police team.
This is not something that we see widespread, a person impersonating the Chicago Police Department. So that person was arrested. And again, this is one of the main reasons we've always pushed our If You See Something, Say Something campaign. It's even more important now as tensions are heightened throughout the city and throughout the country.
As for the man taken into custody, detectives are investigating and police tell us charges are pending. In the newsroom, Suzanne Lemonnier, CBS News, Chicago.
Thank you, Suzanne. With that busy June weekend ahead, we've learned some festivals are stepping up their security with these heavy-duty blockades. You see them here. They're called vehicle mitigators. We're told the company behind several festivals like Pride Fest and Midsummer Fest are now using the devices after a change to city permits. The new requirement, any festival organizer closing streets must provide vehicle impact protection devices to help protect their patrons from hostile vehicles.
Well, right now, protesters are moving once again through downtown Chicago.
Yeah, the group started with a rally in Grant Park this afternoon, and now they are on the march. Let's go to NBC5's Christian Farr. He's live in the loop, as we can see the protesters and police right there next to you, Christian.
Yeah, it's been a safe protest so far and peaceful. Right now they're on State Street and they're heading south on State Street. We're not far from State and Lake. And earlier they had passed by Trump Tower. So I'm going to have Lisa Fernandez, my photographer, show you the action that's going on right now. The reason for this protest is that they want to challenge President Trump's immigration policy, saying they want him out of Chicago. They want ICE out of Chicago. Now, earlier,
immigrants don't want them here. No hate, no fear.
Now, earlier today, we spoke to the city's deputy mayor, who told us that Chicago is ready and prepared for a similar demonstration that's expected to happen on Saturday, adding that the city is utilizing resources across agencies to make sure everyone is safe. Now, during today's protest, the crowd marched along Michigan Avenue and, like I said before, headed towards Trump Tower. This all started at Ida B. Wells and Michigan Avenue in Grant Park. At Grant Park, there was a counter-protester who held up a sign asking that ICE be welcomed here in Chicago. Of course, protesters shouted at him. He was taken away by ambulance. We're not sure exactly what happened to him, but speakers took to the podium right after that.
First, we need to protect ourselves and our community. We need people who can talk to their neighbors and make sure that everyone has a Know Your Rights card in their language, and that we have practiced how to stay silent and keep our doors closed. Second, we need to show the resistance in the streets, like right now.
And again, back here live, you can see these protesters heading down State Street. They had passed by Trump Tower. They didn't go towards Trump Tower. I believe they were prevented to get there. But this, again, has been a peaceful protest. Police standing by, allowing them to march through the streets of Chicago, causing a little bit of traffic gridlock. This is not a large protest. We expect the one on Saturday to be much larger. We'll have a wrap-up for you in our 10 o'clock newscast. For now, reporting live.
Well, right now, protesters are moving once again through downtown Chicago.
Yeah, the group started with a rally in Grant Park this afternoon.
But again, this is the problem that comes about when demonstrators take to the streets and no one really knows the true organizers. You heard Sabrina say earlier that she was trying throughout the day to get in contact with this group that started the demonstration at Federal Plaza, but there were so many groups that came together at Federal Plaza, it was unclear who was actually orchestrating and organizing this event. But as we continue to walk down State Street, I'm going to be careful because Chicago police, this is their staging area. They're still monitoring the situation. We have been aware that top brass CPD officers are out here monitoring this situation, and that is important. I have not seen Superintendent Larry Snelling out here, but we do know top CPD brass on the streets monitoring the situation as this group has traveled from Federal Plaza all the way, tried to get on DuSable Lakeshore Drive. I want to show you some video that we were able to shoot earlier in the day. This was around maybe 6 o'clock, 6:15, close to the 6:30 hour. It shows individuals being arrested. If we have that video, let's take it. We want to show, I saw 2 individuals getting arrested. This video shows the young lady being carried by her hands and feet, wrapped in a flag, as we as police took her and then put her in the transport vehicle. As you heard, our photojournalist Sam Vega, he also mentioned that he saw police detain several people. Why they were detained, to be determined. But I can tell you this much, when we come back live, when this group came down State Street on North, here on State Street, and they tagged these vehicles, not a single person was detained because we were standing here and that group continued on. So there's a good chance that CPD witnessed what happened, and that goes to show the de-escalation that they're dealing with. Even though they're seeing individuals, it may have not been advantageous for them to pull someone when they're surrounded and outnumbered in a crowd. So yes, it's not good to see any police squad defaced in this manner, but keep in mind, they deal with de-escalation training, and maybe being the aggressor in a crowd like that would not have been advantageous for any of the officers.
Yeah.
At this hour, we do not know of any serious injuries and/or major arrests related to all of the demonstrations that have been taking place here in the Loop, and we're going to monitor the situation as we have been doing.
We are back, and we want to update you on this demonstration that is weaving its way through the Loop right now, an anti-ICE demonstration that's been active since about 3:30 or 4 this afternoon. Started with a relatively small crowd, but it has grown considerably, and we do understand now that police have arrested some people while they try to control this crowd. Let's check in with our Sabrina Franza. She is on the ground right now. What's the latest, Sabrina?
Hey, Joe, we're standing right now at the corner of State and Monroe, where it does appear that Chicago police have taken at least one person that we witnessed into custody. It's not clear why that person was taken into custody, but the crowd that has been walking through the Loop is now walking this way down Monroe and was surrounding. Okay, we're trying to figure out exactly what happened here. It appears as if something has happened to a police officer. We're trying to figure out exactly what happened. There's somebody that's on the ground. There's somebody who went through the protest. Okay, a red car drove through the protest is what I'm now hearing. We're now trying to just get a little bit closer to see exactly what happened. At least one person is hurt, is now on the sidewalk here. Our photojournalist is now walking ahead as we're trying to figure out what else might have happened here. There's a large crowd now gathered at the corner of Monroe and Wabash, surrounding some of the people that were hit or are seeking some sort of treatment. It seems like they might just be panic here. A young child is now on the ground. It appears as if they either are just scared or might have been hurt. Police are surrounding them here. And at this corner, protesters seem to be covering maybe one of the victims with a sign to try to either protect their privacy or to get them some help here.
Yeah, we're hoping,
Joe,
Sabrina,
just very chaotic scene.
Right as we came to you there, Sabrina, I think the car had just gone through. Skywatch was able to catch it, and luckily when we saw it, it didn't hit anyone, but that car was coming very close to a number of the demonstrators, and we're seeing it now on the screen as that car continues to weave through downtown. Skywatch is overhead. It doesn't appear at this point as if there are any police officers who have either tracked it or found it, but Skywatch is overhead right now with a bead on this vehicle as it continues to run lights and weave its way through downtown. But as far as you can tell, Sabrina, was anyone hit where you are there?
It did seem like there was at least one person that might have fallen. I don't know, Joe, if it was in relation to the car that drove by or if that person just happened to be pushed out of the way in some way. There are some children that were here because there were a lot of families here earlier that just kind of pulled over to the side, were being consoled by their parents, and some police went to go check on them. But now there is the crowd now trying to, I guess, follow maybe where this car was going. It's mass confusion, really, trying to understand exactly what happened. But I did not see anybody with an actual physical injury, just possibly somebody that fell, needed some sort of consolation or help in some way. Thankfully, I haven't seen anybody with any actual injuries.
It is tough to tell where this vehicle is right now. Perhaps Michigan, but it was at least as of a minute or two ago, near Lake, you could see the L tracks. But this car is continuing to make its way around traffic, stopped at times behind cars lined up, but then continuing to go. And again, as we've said, at this point, there are no officers in sight anyway of where this vehicle is. We can hear the sirens as they perhaps give chase to this vehicle, but we'll continue with Skywatch to stay overhead so we can try to get a location, a better location as to where this vehicle is right now. But you can see it speeding along now, and I don't know if our chopper can hear, but if it's possible to back off a little bit so we can sort of try to get an idea of where this vehicle is. It's hard to tell because we're in so tight. And it's also, important this is very difficult for the photographers in our Skywatch to stick with this. As you see there, you have buildings in the way, and there are underpasses, overpasses. It's difficult to stay with a car that's moving at this speed, especially. Okay, so it's southbound on State and just past 14th. So southbound now, we know it is heading on State, so we'll continue to keep an eye on where this goes. You can see cars in front now pulling over, seeing this fast-moving vehicle coming up. But the scariest part of this, if you're just joining us, happened as this vehicle plowed through the line of demonstrators, and that was near State and Monroe. It appears, according to our reporter on the scene there, Sabrina Franza, that no one was hit. That's the good news, because as soon as Skywatch picked this vehicle up, it almost hit a number of those demonstrators who were in the street on State. But here's the car is pulled over now. And again, we're on State and making a turn now. We'll try to get a better location as to where this street is that it's turning onto. It's hard to tell who's driving there at that point, too, and if there's more than one person in the vehicle. Yeah, but that was definitely a scary moment as that car. We've seen it before, clearly, where people are hit in these demonstrations or parades or other celebrations where cars plow through these groups of people. It appears, again, in this case, luckily, no one was hit. The car has come to a stop here after turning off State Street. Here's going to... It looks like he's heading toward the Stevenson. But he has stopped at the light here. Clark and Cermak, is that where it is, Nancy? Okay, Clark and Cermak. Good grief, here are people crossing the street, I hope. What is happening here? Oh, the car is stalled, apparently? And these folks are thinking they're helping by pushing the vehicle out of the way. Although it doesn't look like they're pushing, does it? It looks like the car's still moving. Okay, now the driver's getting out. All right, Clark and Cermak is the intersection where we are. And you can see this vehicle that was involved in this scary incident as it plowed through the demonstrators who were at State and Monroe has come to a stop, and now it looks like these folks are pushing the vehicle, so now it's taking off. Okay, and again, it's unclear at this point if the police even know where this vehicle is. So I'm not sure if CPD is following along, but the car has just passed through Clark and Cermak, heading. All right, he's just missed, I think, the turn that would have taken him to the Stevenson. So, or she, I should say, that now that we know who's gotten out of the car. Okay, now the left turn, or nope, straight through. And look at, oh, how close it came to that. Oh, this is frightening. And here's another example of how hard it is to follow these vehicles. Chris, I'm talking to our executive producer here. I should probably, just for the sake of the viewers watching, do we have a delay on this? I'm asking out loud because I don't know. Okay, there's no delay. So what we're watching here, folks, is live. And as a result, we should all be warned that whatever happens here, we can't delay or stop. before whatever might unfold happens. So we'll continue to track this vehicle. And here we go now. We're going to probably have a difficult time picking this vehicle back up on the other side as Skywatch starts to flip over. Okay, as we continue to follow this vehicle, let's check back in with Sabrina, who's on the ground, where this car just moments ago raced through a crowd of demonstrators. Sabrina, do you have any updates on whether anybody's been hurt?
Joe, right now it seems like the crowd has moved on without a hitch. They're continuing underneath the L train tracks, still protesting what they've been doing for the last few hours here. Unclear, like I mentioned, if anybody's been physically hurt. It does not seem so. I have not seen any ambulances on the ground here. Just protesters continuing to march. At the time the car drove by, of course, we were talking to you, and we were looking ahead, talking about the arrests that have been made so far this afternoon. Only a handful, possibly 2 arrests we're hearing on the ground now. When that car drove through and we heard a woman who was standing just beside us wail with...
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here in the Space Coast. I'm joined by... It's great to be here in the Space Coast. I'm joined by a bunch of leaders that further exemplify why we are not and will never be California.
Florida Attorney General James Uthmeier, alongside Brevard County Sheriff Wayne Ivey and other political leaders and law enforcement officials, gathered to give a warning to any groups thinking about protesting ICE raids here in Central Florida.
If you throw a brick, a firebomb, or point a gun at one of our deputies, we will be notifying your family where to collect your remains at, because we will kill you graveyard dead. We're not going to play.
This all comes as hundreds in Los Angeles continue protesting President Trump's enforcement of immigration laws and ICE raids throughout the country. Things have intensified as Trump called in the National Guard, and now other cities across the country are joining in.
Groups talk about assembling over the weekend. We haven't seen much of that in Florida, but if you do, these guys, the Sheriff's Office, Colonel Howes and the team, we are ready across the state.
So far, there have not been any reported protests or riots here in Brevard County.
This morning, after a week of turmoil from protests in some U.S. cities to new strikes in the Middle East, there are no signs that plans for President Trump's, quote, big beautiful parade are changing. Final preparations are now underway. That'll include hundreds of tanks and roughly 7,000 soldiers.
We have the strongest military in the world.
Tomorrow's celebration here in Washington will honor the Army's 250th anniversary, which also falls on President Trump's 79th birthday. The president says an expected rainstorm won't dampen spirits.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the tanks at all. It doesn't affect the soldiers. They're used to it. They're tough, smart.
With the president in a new legal battle over sending military troops to immigration protests in L.A., he's warning against demonstrators at tomorrow's parade.
If there's any protester who wants to come out, they will be met with very big force.
The Pentagon hopes the parade will help recruitment.
I'm hoping that, at the end of the day, the American public is as excited about the Army as I am.
Still, the Army estimates the festivities will cost $45 million, and that's sparking criticism from Democrats and even some Republicans.
I would save the money, but it's, if the president wants to have a parade, he's the president and I'm not.
The last time D.C. hosted a military parade, 1991, to mark the end of the Gulf War. Several groups are organizing protests across the country, including one called No Kings, denouncing what they call corruption in government.
I don't feel like a king. I have to go through hell to get stuff approved.
One immigrant advocate is also warning his community.
Are you urging people not to protest on Saturday?
Yes, anyone that has an immigration status that can put them in danger for deportation, we are asking not to go.
Now, authorities have installed these metal plates around the city to prevent the tanks from tearing up city streets. Now, President Trump is supposed to watch this parade from right over there. And over here is a Washington Monument. There'll be a large spectator area here. Now, Craig, this has the potential to affect travel across much of the country because there will be a ground stop at Reagan National Airport for 3.5 hours during the parade. Craig?
Gabe Gutierrez for us there along the parade route in Washington. Gabe, thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching. And don't forget, you can catch the Today Show every morning on NBC or take Today when you're on the go. Just follow the Today.
Since the first year of his first term in office, he has wanted a parade. And not just a normal parade, he wants a military parade.
At this time last night, the massive anti-ICE protest in Chicago was still going. We brought you live coverage from the ground and the sky as thousands of demonstrators marched through downtown Chicago. Tonight, we are hearing from Chicago leaders about how the protest was handled and what they're doing ahead of more planned for the weekend. Our Jermont Terry live for us with what he's learned tonight. Jermont?
Joe, the streets here in downtown are much quieter and calmer compared to 24 hours ago when those protesters took over. But with another rally, possibly larger, planned here at Daley Plaza, and not to mention the many events happening this weekend, it could possibly stretch CPD very thin. Chicago police showed up in force when thousands of anti-ICE protesters marched in downtown. CPD, for the most part, tried to let the crowd move freely, but some defaced police cruisers, 17 arrested, as many clashed with officers.
If the police don't go out there with overwhelming numbers in the beginning, it's hard to get it back under control.
Former Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson says he's confident the force is ready for what's scheduled this weekend.
It's going to be a hot weekend in Chicago.
Hot in terms of big events. Besides the planned No Kings rally to counter the president's ICE actions, thousands will pack Rate Field to honor the Chicago-born Pope. Then there's the Puerto Rican Fest in Humboldt Park. Johnson points out it could leave the department stretched.
So they're going to have as many officers out there as they can, and also they're going to have undercovers planted in that group of protesters. The protest is a different animal because you don't know how many people are going to be there. So what you have to do is prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
My God. Tuesday, the driver of this maroon car nearly ran over protesters as she sped through the crowd. Police are still looking for her.
There's public safety concern here. This is something that should not be tolerated.
So says Republican State Rep Dan Ugasti. He's proposing legislation where demonstrators can get arrested and charged with a felony for blocking streets longer than 5 minutes during unplanned protests.
I'm not trying to stop anyone from expressing their First Amendment rights and meeting peacefully and assembling, but we can't have people blocking our streets and causing public safety problems. And we also can't tolerate violence in the street.
Now, Saturday's event that Darius just mentioned is one of around 1,800 protests planned for the nationwide No Kings Day rally. The protest is set for noon at Daley Plaza. But with police still looking for the driver of that car that sped through Tuesday's demonstration, you can see it right there. The city says they are working to communicate with protest organizers differently so they can better understand their possible route and avoid something like that from happening again. We spoke to former Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson about the challenges the department faces while preparing for events like this.
So they're going to have as many officers out there as they can, and also they're going to have undercovers planted in that group of protesters. The protest is a different animal because you don't know how many people are going to be there. So what you have to do is prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
Now, the car plowing through the protest also raised safety concerns among lawmakers. A Republican state representative is now proposing legislation where demonstrators can be arrested and charged with a felony for blocking streets longer than 5 minutes during an unplanned protest.
Well, we have seen an amplified presence of lawyers and volunteers here in the South Loop today, making sure that people are making it to their immigration check-ins and leaving without any issue. Meanwhile, the city, the mayor, Brandon Johnson, and Chicago Police Department telling us they're prepared for this, that they've been in these situations with these large protests that have prepared them for this weekend. Large crowds are expected to descend onto downtown Chicago this weekend for protests against the Trump administration.
The first and foremost goal and our responsibility is to keep everyone safe and to protect the rights of the people of this city and around the country. And so constitutional policing is our prevailing form of leadership, and we will continue to ensure that constitutional policing is carried out.
The city is preparing additional police resources as we saw some issues arise during Tuesday's protest, which led to the arrests of 17 people. There was also a woman hurt when a car drove through the crowd near East Monroe. Heather Blair says she was in the back of the protest when that driver suddenly came through.
I was feeling pain in my arm, like what happened? And the next thing I know, people are carrying me to the sidewalk and calling an ambulance.
That driver left the scene and police are still searching for them. Meanwhile, the organizers of Saturday's protests are preparing for situations like that with safety training for their marshals, while also working with Chicago police to keep everyone safe.
We do so with a commitment to the principles of nonviolence, peaceful protest, and letting people express their First Amendment rights to their government. We will have our safety marshals, our trained safety marshals there. There'll be some security people there as well.
Similar protests have happened in Los Angeles over the last several days as ICE raids have been met with tensions there. It's led the Trump administration to send in the National Guard and the U.S. Marines. Chicago police issuing a statement on how they're hoping to avoid that unrest, saying the department is experienced in handling these kinds of protests. They go on to say, in part, with public safety as our top priority, our planning and training for First Amendment assemblies are rooted in constitutional policing and the safety of all those participating, working, and living in the affected areas. So that rally is planned for Saturday at noon. That'll happen at Daley Plaza.
Whose streets? Our streets. Whose streets? Our streets. Whose streets? Our streets. Our streets. Whose streets? Our streets. Whose streets? No KKK, no fascist, no Trump. No Trump. No KKK, Fuck Trump! Fuck guys! 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 Fuck Trump! No fear! Immigrants are welcome here! No hate!
It's summertime in Chicago, which means every weekend is jam-packed. The Puerto Rican Festival and Parade in Humboldt Park, the Taste of Randolph, Pope Leo XIV Celebration Mass at Rate Field, and so much more happening this weekend. But there's also more anticipated protest and potential ICE activity in our area. So we appreciate Deputy Mayor of Community Safety, Gary and Gatewood, coming back to Good Day Chicago. We said we're going to try to pull him in as often as possible to talk about the city's plans. We really appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me again.
Okay, we've got a lot to talk about for this weekend. As I mentioned, several events. I was downtown yesterday evening taking care of some business when Michigan Avenue was shut down, okay, for the protests that were taking place. And I'll say the crowds were large, but thus far the demonstrations in our city have really remained not nearly as destructive as what we're seeing in places like LA and other states. So what do you attribute to that?
Partnership. I think it is the collaboration that we have with the organizers of these protests, the fact that we are a city that has been built on protests, and the fact that we're ready and prepared for them. Obviously, you saw that with the DNC. Mm-hmm. You've seen basically weekly protests in the city without large arrests, without large civil unrest. So what we do is we continue to work together. That's what we'll be doing this weekend. We are expecting a large protest. We need it to be peaceful. We need people to understand that this is our city, and we need to keep our city safe. So that's what we're expecting.
Yeah, let's expand on that, because there is a palpable level of concern going into the weekend with so many events happening, and with No King's Day, what's being called No King's Day tomorrow. And so I want you to talk about, you know, what a lot of people may not understand in terms of the working of if the federal government is on site with possible deployment in our area, if they're having a tactical team in our area. What does that look like, and what are roles like? What we're seeing in LA, I think, how do you balance security but then also people's First Amendment rights?
Absolutely. So our local law enforcement will be in the lead, right? The Johnson administration, Superintendent Snelling, will be in the lead of what we're doing in public safety in the city of Chicago. Our responsibility is to make sure people can exercise their First Amendment rights. We don't get in the way of that. We want people to be peaceful. We want people to protest peacefully. People have very strong opinions about what is happening at a national level. They have the right to exercise that. What people don't have the right to do is tear our city up. Mm-hmm. So we have to make sure people are held accountable. Now, what is happening on the federal level with ICE raids, and obviously we know that people are concerned about that. Our concern is to make sure we keep Chicago safe. We keep everybody who lives in this city safe, the residents that come through this city safe, and that's what we're focused on. Mm-hmm. Exercising First Amendment rights. Please, again, this city has been built on protests. We're going to keep you safe, though, and that's our goal, and this is why we're working with our partners at.
Hi there, and welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles in Washington. As the White House warns of additional military deployments in American cities, with pockets of unrest persisting in Los Angeles, ICE preparing to deploy tactical units to major U.S. cities, and protests against the administration's immigration crackdown spreading across the country. At the White House today, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt doubled down on the president's harsh rhetoric.
The mob violence is being stomped out. The criminals responsible will be swiftly brought to justice. And the Trump administration's operations to arrest illegal aliens are continuing unabated. The position of the Democrat Party is that the federal government is not allowed to enforce our laws and to arrest and deport illegal alien criminals. They're attempting to use a violent mob as a weapon against their own constituents to prevent the enforcement of immigration law. This is deeply un-American and morally reprehensible.
Now, we should note there is no evidence that Democrats or any specific organization are behind the protests in Los Angeles or elsewhere. And as we've been noting, the pockets of unrest have so far been contained to a small area in downtown Los Angeles. But the comments came a day after President Trump, in front of thousands of soldiers at Fort Bragg, vowed to liberate Los Angeles from what he described as an invasion.
Under the Trump administration, this anarchy will not stand. We will not allow federal agents to be attacked, and we will not allow an American city to be invaded and conquered by a foreign enemy. I'll say it loudly and clearly. They better do something before it's too late. Very simply, we will liberate Los Angeles and make it free, clean, and safe again.
A defense official tells NBC News that 700 Marines are mobilized and in the Los Angeles area, but are not on the streets yet. But they could be sent out as early as today. A curfew ordered by Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass will remain in effect for a second night tonight for portions of downtown. The LAPD says it made nearly 200 arrests yesterday, more than the total arrests made on the previous 3 days, in what the police chief is calling a concerning escalation in unlawful and dangerous behavior. In a nighttime address, California Governor Gavin Newsom blamed the president for the continued unrest, while issuing this warning to other cities.
California may be first, but it clearly will not end here. Other states are next. Democracy is next. Democracy is under assault before our eyes. This moment we have feared has arrived. He's taking a wrecking ball to our founding fathers' historic project. 3 co-equal branches of independent government. There are no longer any checks and balances. The founding fathers, they didn't live and die to see this kind of moment. It's time for all of us to stand up.
In New York, meanwhile, the NYPD says it made dozens of arrests at an anti-ICE protest in Lower Manhattan. In Denver, police say they've made 17 arrests outside the state capitol, as our NBC affiliate reports that police deployed smoke and pepper balls to disperse the crowd. And Texas Governor Greg Abbott says that he's deploying the Texas National Guard to locations across the state ahead of protests planned in San Antonio. Meanwhile, NBC News has exclusive reporting that ICE is preparing to deploy its special response teams to 5 cities and regions run by Democrats: Seattle, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, and the Washington, D.C. area. NBC News correspondent David Noriega joins us again from Los Angeles. Also with me is NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley, NBC News chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander, and NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Cubie. David, let's start with you. We've been checking in with you all week. Describe what the mood is like there today compared to what it was like this time yesterday.
Well, Ryan, things are actually substantially calmer here today, right now, as compared to exactly this time yesterday. When I spoke to Gabe at 1 o'clock local yesterday, there was a crowd of about 100 to 200 protesters right behind me. They were spilling into the street. Tensions were ratcheting up with not only the National Guard troops and federal agents that are stationed in front of the federal building there behind me, but also with LAPD, which subsequently moved in and cleared this road of protesters. This has been the trend line. The number of protesters coming out, the sort of degree of confrontation that they've had with police has been steadily going down. And I attribute that very clearly, based on my observations on the ground, to the major crackdown by local and state and county law enforcement, which has been throwing a ton of resources into this, putting lots of police on the ground and making them, very ready, very quick to use non-lethal force to control and disperse these crowds. The latest escalation in that law enforcement crackdown, of course, being Mayor Bass's curfew last night and these, hundreds of arrests that happened overnight, Ryan.
And you mentioned those arrests, LAPD saying that they arrested nearly 200 people yesterday. That's more than the total arrests that they made Saturday and Sunday and Monday. What do you attribute the sudden uptick to?
Look, I think the dynamic here is one where Mayor Bass and the governor and the relevant law enforcement agencies are continuing to try to show to the federal government, to everybody else, that they have this situation under control. And again, from what I've seen, they very much do have the situation under control. Local, state, and county law enforcement are far outnumbering protesters on the street at this point. I've also noticed a bit of a shift in the tactics of the protesters themselves. They're becoming somewhat less confrontational, more eager to avoid law enforcement rather than come into direct contact with them. Yesterday, for example, there was a pretty large, maybe 200 to 300 people march around the various streets of downtown, moving pretty far away from this collection of federal buildings where most of the protests have been happening over the last few days, but they were moving very fast, very clearly trying to avoid law enforcement. And again, just a reminder, 200 to 300 people, that's my estimate, is still several. The number of police that I've heard from some law enforcement commanders on the ground is over 1,000. So we're still talking about a number of protesters that is dwarfed by the amount of police. One thing to note, though, Ryan, is that, you know, as we move through this week, the protest seems to be reduced to a pretty hard core of committed protesters. This weekend, we may see some much bigger mobilizations, not just here, but around the country, Ryan. That's the expectation.
Okay, David Noriega on the ground. As always, David, if something pops up there, please let us know and we'll bring you on immediately. Julia, let's go to you now. What can you tell us about what we're learning now? This is just coming in, the deployment of any federal surveillance programs in Los Angeles.
That's right. We had heard reports from our affiliate on the ground and others, David, our colleagues Jacob Soboroff, about predator drones that were reported in the area. Now DHS is actually posting to X footage from those drones, confirming that they are from Customs and Border Protection's air and marine operations. And I just got off the phone with Jacob Soboroff, who said that he saw a CBP labeled Black Hawk in the area where he is right now, outside of Los Angeles. So this is part of CBP, Customs and Border Protection. They have what's called the air and marine operations. And those helicopters, I've been in them, are typically used for rescue recovery efforts along the border. They fly through really rough terrain where migrants may be trying to evade Customs or Border Protection. They can find them there, and oftentimes they're rescuing people who are in distress. That's how they've used them previously. In this case, they're using them for surveillance, that Black Hawk that Jacob saw, and their surveillance footage from those drones is quite striking, not only of where ICE may go to make arrests, but also being able to surveil the protests there. So it's raising new questions about the surveillance being done by federal law enforcement in that area.
And you have some new reporting on ICE's next targets. What do we know about those cities, and how soon could those operations begin?
Yeah, that's right. Well, we understand from the president yesterday, he answered Garrett Hake in the Oval Office, that he does plan to replicate what you're seeing in Los Angeles across the country. And one way we're seeing that play out already is that ICE is getting ready to deploy these special response teams. Think of that as like a SWAT team for ICE. Those are people who could go out with long guns, Bearcats, tracked and armored vehicles. They're trained for situations where they might be making a mass number of arrests, like workplace enforcement, or in cases where they think they might encounter a threat. They were used in the raid on Diddy's home last year. If you remember the footage of that, quite striking when you saw really the SWAT team go in. They're not typically used in cases where you might be making arrest of non-criminal, non-threatening migrants in communities like Los Angeles. In fact, usually federal law enforcement tries not to use that escalated tactic unless they are prepared for their response. And of course, it was those military tactics that prompted some of the protesters staying in Los Angeles starting last week. And so now they're prepared to use those in 5 cities across the United States. As we understand it from our reporting so far, those include Seattle, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, and the D.C. area. That's not to say, Ryan, that we couldn't see arrests in other areas. We've already seen arrests in Omaha, Nebraska starting yesterday. But we know that at least in those cities, which we have to point out are sanctuary cities run by Democratic leaders, those are the areas where they are preparing to deploy those types of resources.
Okay, Julia Ainsley, thank you for that. Let's move now to Peter Alexander at the White House. And Peter, what have we learned about the Trump administration's apparent willingness to escalate these military deployments?
Well, Ryan, I think Julia detailed it well. We have heard from the president himself talking about his willingness to crack down on what he describes as protests. The White House later clarifying he's referring specifically to violent protests if they are to arise in other cities around the country right now, like they point to what's taken place in L.A. at this time. Specifically, what we're going to be keeping a close eye on is whether the president is willing to go further and invoke the Insurrection Act here, which would allow these federalized members of the military, the National Guard, the Marines, as well as other service members to use force and to make arrests themselves. That would be a significant step. Already the steps we've seen have been dramatic. This is the first time, as we've been covering, in 50 years, 5 decades, at least, that the U.S. government, the president, has federalized American troops in a state against the wishes or without a request from that state's governor, in this case, Gavin Newsom. We should note we heard from Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, a bit earlier today. There was one particularly fiery exchange where she made the argument that a majority of the arrests, the majority of the protesters there have been engaged in violent activity. Notably, she said, nearly 400 people have been arrested who were undocumented immigrants in this country. We heard, though, from a reporter in the room reminding her that there have been thousands of people participating here. So it's not entirely clear. So it is clear, I think we should say, that the president has been amplifying the size and scope of this when we know, in fact, it's isolated to a small area. But certainly this is a place that he feels like he has the political advantage, and one where White House aides and other allies of the president have communicated that he is more than willing to lean in. Ryan?
Yeah, and maybe expand on that a little bit. I mean, how far is the president willing to go, considering, as you point out, they seem eager to lean in to these political issues? Is this just the beginning?
Yeah, it does certainly appear to be that way right now. We heard from Tom Homan, the so-called border czar, who has said in recent interviews that the White House right now, the administration is, in his words, opening up the aperture. You'll remember early on throughout the campaign, the president said the focus would be on violent criminals, the worst of the worst. But already we're seeing some pictures from around the country where they are clearly opening up that aperture, in Homan's words, echoing the words of Stephen Miller, one of the president's top aides here, where they're trying to bring up their numbers to as many as 3,000 arrests and deportations each day. That's well ahead of the numbers they've been seeing early on. And it does speak to one of the unique challenges they're facing right now, and what is really fundamental to the debate over what we're witnessing right now, whether the focus is on those individuals who have committed crimes, who are violent criminals, or individuals who have served, who have worked in the United States for years, perhaps in restaurants or in fields, and the only crime they have committed is entering into the United States illegally. Brian.
Okay. Peter Alexander at the White House, thank you for that. Let's now go to our national security correspondent, Courtney Kuby, who is joining me now with more on the role the military could play in all of this. Do we have any new details, Courtney, about how the Marines could be a part of what's happening in Los Angeles?
Yeah, we do, Ryan. So we know that these 700 Marines who were based at 29 Palms in California were moved in or mobilized to closer into the LA area earlier this week. But since then, they haven't actually been on the ground as part of this Task Force 51. In fact, they're still back again in the LA area, but not forward and actually deployed. And they're undergoing some very basic training to get ready for this mission. That includes things like learning about the standard rules of force. Ryan, you may have heard the term rules of engagement. That's what the military talks about when they're overseas. When they're here domestically, they refer to them as rules of force. It's the left and right limits about what these Marines will be allowed to do while they are under Task Force 51, if in fact they do end up on the streets of LA. So far, what we know, they will be tasked with protecting federal buildings and personnel. They always have the inherent right of self-defense. But Ryan, according to a couple of sources familiar, we are also told that the Marines could be used to protect ICE personnel while they're on raids. That could include even driving some of those ICE agents to these immigration raids, Ryan.
And I assume this is not exactly what Marines are normally trained to do. What are Marines trained to do and not to do?
Yeah, it's a very different mission for U.S. Marines. Look, Marines consider themselves warfighters. We hear the word out of even Secretary of Defense every single time we hear from him. The concern here is not that they can't handle the situation. The concern is that they are trained in a very different way than someone like the Los Angeles Police Department or DHS would be to handle situations like this. It's everything from just the language that they use while they're on a mission. Those are the kinds of things that they are trying to iron out before they put these Marines on the street. The real concern in here is some very simple misunderstanding that's based on nothing more than a difference in the training could lead to a situation that puts Marines in a dangerous situation or even in a place that it could put them in an even unlawful situation, Ryan.
Right. And perhaps innocent people caught up in it as a result of it as well. And you mentioned the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. He was back on Capitol Hill for the second day. What were your biggest takeaways from his testimony today?
Yeah, there was a lot of talk about the deployment in L.A. He didn't provide a whole lot new detail, but I was really struck by his acknowledgement that this could expand out from just L.A. to other places in the country. He didn't talk a whole lot more about the overall price tag. We learned yesterday it was $134 million for these first 60 days. We don't know how much longer, frankly, it could go, but he was defiant when discussing this issue, saying that, in fact, the president has the authority to do this. He was pressed by Senator Baldwin, though, and I was really struck by the exchange because she asked him, look, we know what authority the president is bringing in the California National Guard. It's under his Title 10 authority. Why are the Marines there? Under what authority? He couldn't answer that. He said he would get back to her with an answer later.
And this, of course, all 3 days before the Saturday military parade here in Washington. What more do we know about that parade?
Yeah, so we're still, the big headline out of this continues to be the potential price tag here, Ryan. Officials still believe it could fall somewhere in the $45 million range. Right now, Army officials, and specifically Army engineers, are pretty confident that the damage to D.C. streets, you see some heavy vehicles here, including tanks that are expected to be out on the streets of D.C. for this parade on Saturday. They're confident that the measures they are taking to mitigate any damage are going to be effective. It's simple things like putting down steel plates. They're redoing some of the treads. You can see on the tanks there, they're putting a new rubber tread on them. The hope is that those kinds of things will stop some damage to D.C. streets, or at least mitigate that. Right now, there is an estimate for up to $16 million that this could cost D.C. in damage.
Okay, Courtney Cubie on Capitol Hill today for a change. It was nice having you there today, Courtney. Thank you so much.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.
Turning now to the day's other headlines. More demonstrations against ICE deportations are expected in a number of cities tonight, but many protesters are saving their energy for a day of national protests against President Trump tomorrow. In California, where protests first erupted about a week ago, the presence of U.S. Marines and the National Guard on the streets has been a flashpoint. Reuters reported that the Marines carried out the first detention of a civilian this afternoon outside a federal building they are protecting. There are bigger questions, too, about whether courts will allow the Guard and the Marines to remain for a second week. Lisa Desjardins has our report.
A rare sight, Marines on the street of a major U.S. city, today in Los Angeles, guarding federal assets. This after a third night of curfews and arrests. Local media reported dozens arrested, a figure notably lower than previous nights, and now more cities are seeing reactions. In Chicago yesterday, hundreds marched down the city's iconic Michigan Avenue.
ICE out of Chicago, ICE out of Illinois, ICE out of everywhere!
Protests against ICE and Trump's immigration crackdown also rose in San Antonio, Texas, Portland, Oregon, Spokane, Washington, and several other cities. In Newark, New Jersey, tumult outside a key ICE detention facility. Protesters attempted to block officers at the gate. At that location, 4 detainees escaped yesterday after breaking through a wall. Attorneys say detainees complained about conditions, including a lack of food for nearly a day. New Jersey Senator Andy Kim said the Trump administration mishandled this.
And when they're talking about what actions that they're taking, this is a perfect example of the shoddiness of this plan. This is a symbol for the brokenness of the Trump administration plan when it comes to immigration.
In California, legal upheaval over the National Guard. A federal judge ruled last night that control must be returned to California Governor Gavin Newsom. But hours later, an appellate court temporarily restored the president's deployment, pending a Tuesday hearing. President Trump celebrated the appeals ruling on Truth Social. If I didn't send the military to Los Angeles, that city would be burning to the ground right now. The initial ruling from Judge Charles Breyer held that protests were far short of rebellion, and Trump overstepped. Governor Newsom.
He is not a monarch, he is not a king, and he should stop acting like one.
Protesters plan for that to be a theme tomorrow when thousands of No King rallies are planned. But not in Washington, D.C. The city is preparing for tomorrow's military parade for the Army's 250th birthday. It's also Trump's birthday. Officials are bracing for potential counter-demonstrators and also weather. Thunderstorms are forecast. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Lisa Desjardins.
Also today, a federal judge in Massachusetts today blocked part of President Trump's executive order aimed at overhauling elections. Judge Denise Casper sided with Democrats in finding that the Constitution does not grant a president specific powers over voting. Mr. Trump signed an order in March that would have required proof of citizenship for federal elections. It also barred states from accepting mail-in ballots that arrived after Election Day. Today's decision comes after a federal judge in Washington, D.C. also blocked the proof of citizenship requirement. The White House has defended the order, saying it supports free, fair, and honest elections. In Tennessee, Kilmar Abrego Garcia pleaded not guilty today to federal charges of human smuggling. It was the first time the construction worker and longtime Maryland resident has appeared in a U.S. courtroom since he was mistakenly deported to El Salvador in March. The Trump administration brought him back to the U.S. last week to face criminal charges that stem from a 2022 traffic stop.
The people united will never be divided.
Abrego Garcia's supporters called for his freedom outside the courthouse today. And at a nearby church, his wife, Jennifer, described seeing her husband for the first time in 3 months.
Kilmar was taken on March 12th, and it was not until yesterday that I was able to visit him for the first time. I'm grateful for everyone who has been fighting for this milestone and this fight to bring my husband back home with our children.
Meantime, a federal judge has sided with the Trump administration's push to keep Columbia University graduate Mahmoud Khalil in detention. That's despite a previous judge's order saying the pro-Palestinian activist could no longer be held based on the administration's initial argument that he's a threat to U.S. foreign policy. The government now says Khalil is being held on other grounds, claiming that he lied on his green card application. The head of the Smithsonian Portrait Gallery is stepping down 2 weeks after President Trump said on social media that he had fired her. Kim Sayet's departure was announced in a memo to staff, which was provided to the NewsHour. In it, she is quoted as saying, "This was not an easy decision, but I believe that stepping aside is the best way to serve the institution I hold so deeply in my heart." Her announcement comes just days after the Smithsonian made a public statement asserting its independence over personnel decisions. In India, investigators say they've recovered the flight data recorder from yesterday's Air India crash. The black box should provide clues as to why the London-bound Boeing 787 fell from the sky just minutes after.
Good morning. Well, city officials learning that the federal government has prepped ICE tactical teams. Federal agents were told that they have 48 hours to stand by and be ready to deploy.
There will be tactical teams, there will be mini tanks, there will be other tools that they use in which they plan to do raids, as we saw in Los Angeles.
There's one branch of government right now in this country, one branch. He has taken over the courts. The Congress says nothing. And so people are terrified. But in the city of Chicago, we are going to remain vigilant and firm in protecting what is sensible about our existence. And that's ensuring that the Constitution is actually maintained. Here's the bottom line is this. You either support the Constitution or you do not. And right now, this president is literally just trampling all over the Constitution.
Now, Mayor Brandon Johnson says their first order of business is keeping Chicagoans safe in the event of an ICE operation in the city. The deputy mayor for immigrant, migrants, and refugee rights says one of the challenges they will face is the need for legal support and deportation defense. Johnson saying ICE raids create division and chaos. Earlier this week, Chicago police arrested more than a dozen people during a large Tuesday evening protest against ICE activity. City leaders say it is fair to allow Chicagoans to exercise their right to free speech, but preserving public safety for people to shop or work downtown is also top of mind.
We will work with our community partners to continue to stand up for our immigrant community and for all of our people in our beloved city.
Now, a few events happening today. Today, there will be a press conference downtown. Local organizations will speak about how ICE is impacting communities. There will be a 4 p.m. march, and on Saturday, there will be a rally at the Daley Plaza. Live here downtown, Winnie Deutsch, WGN News.
Thank you, Winnie.
We're following breaking news this morning. We're seeing reports that the White House plans to send ICE tactical units to 5 Democratic cities, including Seattle. This according to MSNBC. The other cities are Chicago, New York City, Philadelphia, and Northern Virginia. They were recently used in Los Angeles and are considered one of the main reasons why those violent protests broke out. And this comes one day after protests outside the federal building in downtown Seattle. The protest over ICE raids happening across the nation was calm for most of the day, but took a turn later in the evening. Fox 13's Sean Chitness has more near the federal building.
We're seeing a typical start to the day here at 2nd and Madison as people have gone into the federal building, but we aren't seeing any protesters around this site. The few bikes and scooters that are here are being used by folks to get around the city. We know that there were some protesters around the building overnight, and some of those bikes were still being used to try and block the entrances to the building. So take a look at what we saw yesterday. This is video of protesters when they were able to pile up those bikes and anything else they could find to block cars from exiting the Henry M. Jackson Federal Building. These protests join demonstrations we've seen across the country this week. A common goal is to try and block ICE agents from taking anyone who is detained during an immigration hearing, where they are then usually sent to the Northwest ICE Processing Center in Tacoma. The protest was mostly peaceful for much of the day, and for hours last night in the early evening, protesters were able to block part of the building, and people inside did not leave. Seattle police showed up around 8 p.m., and protesters quickly ran into the street as they watched a van exit the building. There were confrontations between police and protesters, with officers using pepper spray and other tactics like non-lethal rounds to clear demonstrators. Later in the night, we did see some protesters burning an American flag. They tried to raise it on a flagpole, but weren't able to do it. President Trump had said just hours before that, anyone who burns an American flag should spend a year in prison. And as we wait to see if there's any activity around the federal building later today, we do know that an anti-ICE protest is scheduled for this evening at Cal Anderson Park. Reporting in Seattle, Sean Chitness, Fox 13 News.
Thank you, Sean. As we know, Seattle is not the only city seeing these types of protests. In New York, protesters in Manhattan scuffled with police last night. Several hundred people were reportedly part of the demonstrations, and several were arrested. And in Chicago, a car drove through a group of protesters there. Hundreds of people were out when the driver swerved through the crowd, forcing people to jump out of the way. It is unclear if anyone was hurt. And in Los Angeles, as we've been reporting all morning, a curfew has been imposed for a portion of downtown after days of protests there. It started at 8 each night and is going to go until 6 in the morning. A group of students and their supporters are angry about the expulsion of the campus group Students United for Palestinian Equality and Return, or SUPER for short. They rallied near the U District light rail station last night. Last month, SUPER was at the center of the occupation of an engineering building on campus funded by Boeing.
I'm very concerned about this trend of the tech companies starting to get into weapons manufacturing and using their AI and their technology to do things that have not been vetted by any kind of ethics committee.
According to the university, last month's occupation caused more than $1 million in damage and led to several student suspensions. SUPER says those suspensions and expulsions included 4 students who were set to graduate. The group says that students weren't given due process before being let go.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. All over the country this week, regular people are mobilizing against Donald Trump and his administration's overreach, both against his reckless, destructive efforts to detain law-abiding, peaceful neighbors in communities across the country, and also his decision, under dubious legal authority, to mobilize the National Guard and the Marines against peaceful demonstrators. Today, we are seeing folks taking the streets demonstrating against what is happening in this country, from Los Angeles to New York, El Paso to Raleigh. And this weekend, there will be many, many more protests, coast to coast, in cities big and small towns, to counter-program Trump's North Korean-style military parade he's throwing himself on his 79th birthday. Those protesters have a simple message: we have no king in America. The constitutional right to protest, enshrined in the First Amendment, exists for a reason. And I got to say, watching all this develop over the last few days, it feels odd to have to say this, but protests are good, actually. Protests against cruelty and tyranny and for our shared values are a good thing, and never more so than in the face of an authoritarian threat to our most cherished liberties. And to be clear, any debate about the optics of peaceful protest or whether or not demonstrators are just playing into Donald Trump's hands obfuscates the fact that people should be peacefully protesting against the ongoing attempt to end American democracy we've been witnessing. An attempt that began on Trump's first day in office of this term, when as one of his very first official acts as president, he pardoned every single participant in the violent insurrection he incited at the Capitol on January 6th. Even the people who bashed the heads of cops in. The people convicted of seditious conspiracy against our country in jury trials. Of course, the Attorney General and Trump's spokesperson, as she is, says this is all different somehow.
You've been criticized for having a double standard with the president pardoning all these people who attacked police officers on January 6th in his first day in office. How do you answer that criticism?
Well, this is very different. These are people out there hurting people in California right now. This is ongoing, no longer. We're going to protect them. We're going to do everything we can to prosecute violent criminals in California. California is burning. These people are waving Mexican flags, yet they don't want anyone to go back to Mexico. They're burning American flags. This is the United States of America, and we're going to protect Americans. We're going to protect all citizens out there.
First of all, I'm just duty-bound to say, when January 6th was ongoing, when people were getting hurt and Donald Trump had a chance to stop it, he didn't, remember? Crucially, right? So when it was happening, when he was watching the coverage of the cops getting their heads bashed in, he didn't stop it. Also, she's, I think, misrepresenting the protests in California. The Constitution protects waving a Mexican flag at a protest. If foreign flags require the National Guard, I got bad news for some members of Congress. Perhaps most importantly, the January 6th rioters hurt people. They assaulted cops with bear spray and tasers and flagpoles. Those pardons on that first day made it crystal clear, if it wasn't already, it was to me, but for anyone else who was following. Donald Trump does not care a whit about law and order, about the law, about any order other than one with him on top. Now, he's federalizing the National Guard. He's sending Marines in the streets of Los Angeles because he wants to silence any dissent by force. He's been fantasizing about this moment for years. And he's also scared of mass public opposition to him. That's why his own White House is outright lying about the protesters.
The president, as I just answered, supports the right of Americans to peacefully protest. He supports the First Amendment. But that is not the majority of the behavior that we have seen taking place in Los Angeles.
I'm sorry, that's just completely divorced from reality. It's more like the opposite of true. The overwhelming majority of protesters in Los Angeles have been peaceful. You, of course, would not know that from watching Fox News, which has been breathlessly covering the protests like a scene out of RoboCop, as if Los Angeles was at risk of burning to the ground any second, banners proclaiming rioters wreak havoc in L.A. Violent anti-ICE protests spread nationwide. They're still at it, even now, days after the demonstrations died down, like looping the same things burning that were burning 4 days ago. And again, Donald Trump, who watches Fox all day, is pickling his brain in the brine of these lies. The White House even put out its own propaganda video, selectively editing a handful of moments from about 2 city blocks to make it look like the entire city of Los Angeles is burning to the ground. It's not. And yes, people have thrown bricks. They've lit cars on fire. You can see that. They shouldn't do that. They also don't speak for the vast majority of demonstrators who have been entirely peaceful and playing music and dancing and shouting slogans and engaging in prayer. And those people should keep demonstrating peacefully. This is why the right to, quote, peaceably assemble exists and is enshrined in the very First Amendment of the United States Constitution. We, the people, don't wield the power of the state. What the people have is the ability and the right to go out in the streets and to yell and to petition their government and, yes, peaceably assemble. You are allowed to publicly disagree with the government in this country. In fact, the American tradition of protest predates America itself. It's part of what gave rise to America. We all learned about the Boston Tea Party in school, which, by the way, was a lot more property damage than what we see in Los Angeles. Today, basically everybody understands that the protests for racial justice in the mid-20th century, what we call the civil rights movement, were one of the most effective mass mobilizations both in our country's history and in the world. Those protesters knew that while legal challenges to segregation were part of the solution, lawsuits and the like, tangible, nonviolent direct action was equally necessary for victory.
When people were afraid to come out.
Great to have you with us. I'm Joe Donlin.
And I'm Marie Saavedra. We begin with those ICE protests in Chicago and around the U.S. We have team coverage both in California and here at home.
We start with our Sabrina Franza. Sabrina, with more protests ahead for Chicago, you've just learned more ICE agents are coming to our city. And this is all going on as Chicago police prepare for a massive demonstration Saturday.
Joe Marie, here in Chicago, there's slated to be a planned protest as part of the No Kings Rally Day. Chicago will be one of around 1,800 locations across the country participating in that day. That protest is expected to start around noon in Daley Plaza. But before that happens, the city tells us that ICE tactical teams are on their way to Chicago, set to land tomorrow, bringing with them, they say, mini tanks.
Yesterday, the notice was given to agents that they have 48 hours to deploy.
ICE agents in mini tanks, the city revealed in a briefing today, are headed to 5 Democratic-led cities, including Chicago. Tactics similar to what sparked some of the protests in Los Angeles.
With arms, with also chemical agents. We have seen them in full riot gear. We have seen them fully concealed.
This is what democracy looks like. Yesterday, Chicago joined cities like LA and New York, taking over their streets to protest immigration and customs enforcement.
We have a tyrant in the White House who has a complete disregard for our Constitution.
Of the massive group, Chicago police arrested 17 people during yesterday's demonstration in the Loop. Their ages ranged between 20 and 37 years old. 4 of those charged faced felonies, including aggravated battery to a police officer or criminal damage to property. Police are still looking for the person driving this red car who drove through the crowd. Mayor Johnson's team says they're already meeting to figure out a way to stop that from happening again in a situation where we're told there is no established protest route.
There were a number of organizers that, though it was structured, there has to be better coordination.
Now, the city says those tactical teams are aiming to deport people here in Chicago and will possibly show up to their places of work. Also happening tomorrow, Governor J.B. Pritzker is slated to testify in D.C. in front of a House Oversight Committee, so that means he will not be in town when those tactical teams show up. We're live in the Loop. Sabrina Franza, CBS News, Chicago.
Sabrina, thank you. From festivals to protests, thousands of people are expected downtown this weekend.
Our Suzanne Lemagneau reports safety is top of mind for city leaders.
It involves uniformed officers, those in plain clothes, and trained violence interrupters. Social media is also going to play a big role in getting the word out when it comes to staying safe at the upcoming protest. Just like April 5th, thousands of people are expected to converge once again on Daley Plaza this Saturday at noon. They'll be voicing their opposition to the Trump administration's policies, ICE raids, and deportations.
We want people to exercise their First Amendment rights. We also want people to be safe.
Gary Ann Gatewood is the deputy mayor for community safety for the city of Chicago. The so-called No Kings protest is one of many events in the city this weekend. Days off for Chicago police have been canceled.
All of our resources will be out from the Chicago Police Department. We actually had a meeting this morning with all of our community violence interrupters so they can understand how we'll be deploying them and working with them tomorrow as well.
All city agencies are also putting a series of tips on their social media platforms with protesting guidelines and overall safety information. The move comes after the arrest Thursday of a man spotted by police during a protest downtown. Sources say the man was wearing a black polo with the word police on the back and had a black book bag with a police patch on it. The problem is, he wasn't an officer. He was openly carrying a loaded semi-automatic pistol. The man has a FOID card but told police he did not have a concealed carry license. He was found with badges and documents saying he was part of a special police team.
This is not something that we see widespread, a person impersonating the Chicago Police Department. So that person was arrested. And again, this is one of the main reasons we've always pushed our "if you see something, say something" campaign. It's even more important now as tensions are heightened throughout the city and throughout the country.
As for the man taken into custody, detectives are investigating and police tell us charges are pending. In the newsroom, Suzanne Lemonnier, CBS News, Chicago.
Thank you, Suzanne. With that busy June weekend ahead, we've learned some festivals are stepping up their security with these heavy-duty blockades. You see them here. They're called vehicle mitigators. We're told the company behind several festivals like Pride Fest and Midsummer Fest are now using the devices after a change to city permits. The new requirement, any festival organizer closing streets must provide vehicle impact protection devices to help protect their patrons from hostile vehicles.
Well, right now, protesters are moving once again through downtown Chicago.
Yeah, the group started with a rally in Grant Park this afternoon, and now they are on the march. Let's go to NBC5's Christian Farr. He's live in the loop, as we can see the protesters and police right there next to you, Christian.
Yeah, it's been a safe protest so far and peaceful. Right now they're on State Street and they're heading south on State Street. We're not far from State and Lake. And earlier they had passed by Trump Tower. So I'm going to have Lisa Fernandez, my photographer, show you the action that's going on right now. The reason for this protest is that they want to challenge President Trump's immigration policy, saying they want him out of Chicago. They want ICE out of Chicago. Now, earlier,
Immigrants don't want us here. No hate, no fear.
Now, earlier today, we spoke to the city's deputy mayor, who told us that Chicago is ready and prepared for a similar demonstration that's expected to happen on Saturday, adding that the city is utilizing resources across agencies to make sure everyone is safe. Now, during today's protest, the crowd marched along Michigan Avenue and, like I said before, headed towards Trump Tower. This all started at Ida B. Wells and Michigan Avenue in Grant Park. At Grant Park, there was a counter-protester who held up a sign asking that ICE be welcomed here in Chicago. Of course, protesters shouted at him. He was taken away by ambulance. We're not sure exactly what happened to him, but speakers took to the podium right after that.
First, we need to protect ourselves and our community. We need people who can talk to their neighbors and make sure that everyone has a Know Your Rights card in their language, and that we have practiced how to stay silent and keep our doors closed. Second, we need to show the resistance in the streets, like right now.
And again, back here live, you can see these protesters heading down State Street. They had passed by Trump Tower. They didn't go towards Trump Tower. I believe they were prevented to get there. But this, again, has been a peaceful protest. Police standing by, allowing them to march through the streets of Chicago, causing a little bit of traffic gridlock. This is not a large protest. We expect the one on Saturday to be much larger. We'll have a wrap-up for you in our 10 o'clock newscast. For now, reporting live along State Street, Christian Farr, NBC5 News.
Christian, thank you.
But again, this is the problem that comes about when demonstrators take to the streets and no one really knows the true organizers. You heard Sabrina say earlier that she was trying throughout the day to get in contact with this group that started the demonstration at Federal Plaza, but there were so many groups that came together at Federal Plaza, it was unclear who was actually orchestrating and organizing this event. But as we continue to walk down State Street, I'm going to be careful because Chicago police, this is their staging area. They're still monitoring the situation. We have been aware that top brass CPD officers are out here monitoring this situation, and that is important. I have not seen Superintendent Larry Snelling out here, but we do know top CPD brass on the streets monitoring the situation as this group has traveled from Federal Plaza all the way, tried to get on DuSable Lakeshore Drive. I want to show you some video that we were able to shoot earlier in the day. This was around maybe 6 o'clock, 6:15, close to the 6:30 hour. It shows individuals being arrested. If we have that video, let's take it. We want to show, I saw 2 individuals getting arrested. This video shows the young lady being carried by her hands and feet, wrapped in a flag, as police took her and then put her in the transport vehicle. As you heard, our photojournalist Sam Vega, he also mentioned that he saw police detain several people. Why they were detained, to be determined. But I can tell you this much.